Hello everyone and welcome to another World of Warcraft guide video. In today's video, I will be showing you how to solo the Mythic Sepulcher of the First One's raid, which was added in the Shadowlands expansion. The main reason to do this raid is for the fractal cipher of the Xerath Overseer, which has a 1% chance to drop from the Jailer encounter. For this raid, as of 11.0.2, I am going to overall rate as hard. Most encounter mechanics are actually easy, and once more gear is obtainable in the War Within, they will become much easier, but for now, there are some pretty tough DPS checks. For this raid, I will recommend at least an item level 610 character. Set bonuses and best in slot trinkets will make it even easier, but are not required. With the introduction of delves, getting 610 is actually not all that difficult. Just make sure you're at least 610, as many fights require a serious DPS check, which you will see later. The first encounter in this raid is the Vigilant Guardian. I am rating this fight easy. There is a tank debuff that can hurt bad if you take too long, but at 610 item level, you probably won't even notice. Mechanic-wise, there isn't much to worry about. Cleave down the ads and hard focus the boss. Dodge any ground mechanics, and the boss will fall over pretty fast. The next encounter is Skolex the Insatiable Ravener. I am rating this fight intermediate. Overall, this encounter is easy, but there are some nasty tank combos that require some decent self-healing to stay alive, long enough to defeat this boss. Make sure you avoid the ground effects on this fight, and dodge his frontal cone AoE. The boss will do a tank combo on you, and that will hurt. If you take too long, the bleed stack you get in this fight will become unhealable, but at 610 item level, you probably won't even notice. Pretty easy fight. The next encounter is Artificer xymox. I am rating this encounter hard. The ad rings makes it impossible for classes who cannot quickly heal the damage back. xymox is a returning boss from Castle Nathria, and this time he's much more difficult. When you begin, xymox will place the same portal mechanic on you as in Castle. It will hit pretty hard since you are meant to have two separate ones, but because you are soloing this, you get both on you at once. Once he reaches 75%, the boss goes into an immune ad phase. Kill all the ads. As you are killing the first set of ads, you will notice ads off on the platforms which you cannot reach, unless you have a way to jump across, such as warlocks and demon hunters. For the purpose of this guide, I will assume you can't, as I could not. Once you finish the first ad phase, you can bring xymox to his final immune phase, which happens at 45%. At this point, periodically you will see rings shoot out from the platforms you cannot reach. This is where the encounter becomes ridiculously hard if you have no self-healing capabilities. Each ring that hits you will hit for about 800,000, which at 610 item level is roughly 20% of your HP. Having said that, it can tick more than once if you go too slow through it. If you're a class that can blink, this will negate it, but you will have to take many hits of this. Once you finish the ad phase while dealing with the lethal rings, you can turn to xymox and finish him off. Basically, you need to survive multiple hits of these rings and try to kill xymox as fast as you possibly can before you become overwhelmed and unable to heal yourself. This alone makes the fight incredibly difficult, but absolutely doable. The next encounter is Halondrus the Reclaimer. I am rating this encounter hard. There's a bomb mechanic in this that requires you to stay on your toes, and it is very easy to mess it up. When you begin the fight, you will notice the boss has bombs placed on the ground that will explode if you ignore them and will one-shot you. To get through this, you need to keep an eye on the timers, run around and pick one up, and drop it again using the extra action button. Dropping it will reset its timer, but give you a stacking debuff that causes you to take 1000 increased damage by the bomb for 40 seconds. DPS Halondrus as quick as you can to 80% to phase him. He will begin retreating to a new area of the fight. As he's walking away, keep picking up the bombs and dropping them as long as you possibly can before the wall closes on you. The reason you do this is if you leave them alone too early, they will explode on you and you will get one shot. After you get to the platform and you delay the bombs as long as you can, you will still take damage for them, but it won't be lethal if you do it correctly. Having said that, as you can see here, it did hit me for almost 70% of my HP, and I had a 20% damage reduction cooldown up. Basically, you cannot survive the hit if you don't have a DR or some kind of absorb effect. The good news, this is the only hard part of the fight. If you get to this point, the boss is dead. By the time he gets to the next phase, you will already have basically killed him. If you are too slow by chance, Phase 2 does consist of more bombs to deal with, so keep an eye on them until you defeat the boss. It should also be important to know that the boss does do a knockback mechanic on the bridge as you are transitioning to the new platform. Make sure you position yourself so that you don't get knocked off the cliff. Very difficult encounter, but once you get past phase 1 it becomes much easier. The next encounter is Dausegne the Fallen Oracle. I am rating this encounter easy. Fast DPS makes the encounter mechanics easy to ignore. There really isn't much to know about this fight because your DPS is so quick. There's a stacking tank debuff that does hurt towards the end, but she will phase to a different platform and it should fall off if done correctly. Also, kill the ads she spawns as they spawn annoying pools on the ground and have very little HP. You shouldn't have too much trouble with this boss. The next boss is Prototype Pantheon. I am rating this encounter expert. There's some nasty combos you need to be able to be aware of, and the damage output by the bosses is extremely difficult to heal because of the Gloom Bolt. When you begin the encounter, you will want to DPS both prototypes evenly, as you want to get them as close to 40% HP as possible before they phase. If you get one too low and the other too high, it will make the final phase much more difficult. Prototype of War does a Gloom Bolt, which puts an absorb heal on you. Try to interrupt and heal it off as much as possible before it becomes too overwhelming. He also summons ads that perform a ritual, but in this phase you should be fast enough to push them to 40% and ignore it. Prototype of Duty doesn't do anything too noteworthy, other than loads of damage, but there are some ground effects you need to dodge. Once you get them both as close to 40% as possible, they will teleport away and you will have to deal with the other two bosses. Prototype of Renewal has an interruptible cast called Anima Bolt. If you let too many hit you without an interrupt, the stacking debuff will overwhelm you, so make sure you try and interrupt at least one. Her seeds can be ignored. Prototype of Absolution honestly doesn't do much that will overwhelm you. Since Renewal is a caster, you want to start the phase near her and let Absolution come to you. Again, like the last phase, get them as close as you can to 40% HP each, and they will then teleport away. This is where the fight gets extremely hard, as all four will teleport back to the platform at the health you left them at. This is why it's important to get them as close to 40% as you can. You will now have to deal with all abilities at the same time. Start off by interrupting one of the two casters, so you can get them to move on top of the other three ads. You can then cleave them down. To make it even more difficult, you can't exactly burst one down, as once they die, they will heal back to 100% HP after 20 seconds. So you need to cleave them down over time and get them to all die within 20 seconds before the cast finishes. The final thing you need to deal with in this phase is the Necrotic Ritual that you probably skipped in phase 1. This time, you need to go around and kill all 4 ads, as if you don't, the entire room is filled with necrosis, which reduces all healing by 100%, making the rest of the fight impossible. So to summarize, bring all ads to 40% in each respective phase, try to interrupt Gloom Bolt or Anima Bolt to not get overwhelmed. Cleave down the ads in the final phase, and make sure they all die within 20 seconds of each other. If one heals, it's probably a wipe. This is very hard, and requires some pretty hefty self-healing to stay alive, but if you have the item level suggested, you can burst through this fight pretty fast. The next fight is Lihuvim, Principal Architect. I am rating this encounter easy. There's a chance you can get one shot if you take too long, but with 610 item level you shouldn't even notice it. Yeah, just ignore everything in this boss, just nuke it. Cleave the ads if your class allows it and enjoy the easy boss. The next fight is Anduin Rin. I am rating this encounter intermediate. The fight is pretty easy if you're fast enough on your DPS. When the fight begins, you have about 2 minutes and 40 seconds to get this boss down from 136 million. To be fair, with drums and CDs, this is absolutely doable. The reason you need to beat this timer is if you do not, he will take you to a different phase where it's almost impossible to do, unless you're a tank spec. The ads in this phase are Omega buffed. You're meant to get a buff from Anduin before going into this phase, but it's impossible to get solo. So basically, you need to beat this timer or likely wipe. When you begin, there's a few mechanics you need to keep an eye out for. The first one is a ground effect you simply need to move out of. He also does Kingsmorn Hungers, which you need to avoid entirely. If you get hit, It will send you down to a different phase, but because Anduin has no target, it will just reset the fight, so avoid this attack entirely. Later in the fight, he will also put an absorb shield on you. I chose to heal one off, but it might not be necessary, as when I watched back the playback on this, the damage done to me was probably not enough to kill me if I had ignored it. The only other thing to note here is the wicked star he does. It will shoot out in a line, and if it hits you, it will silence you for a few seconds. Do note that it shoots out and comes back kind of like a boomerang, so you need to dodge both hits to avoid the silence, since your DPS matters. I actually got hit by one towards the end and still defeated him, so there's some leeway here, but stay on your toes and the boss will fall. The next encounter is Lords of Dread. I am rating this encounter intermediate. Mechanics are easy, but you need to kill Mal'Ganis within a certain amount of time, or it's a wipe. This fight has to be done a certain way, otherwise it is impossible. There's also a timer that you have to beat, or you will also wipe. Start the fight by DPSing Mal'Ganis. Mal'Ganis does heal for 10% of his HP every time he does the tank ability, so it is deceiving. At 610 item level, this is actually not that bad. You have about 2 minutes to defeat Mal'Ganis, and he has 61 million HP, but keep in mind that he does heal a few times during this. Still very doable, as there is a swarm phase where they will take 100% increased damage. If you do not defeat Mal'Ganis within the 2 minutes, an ability called Infiltration of the Dead will go off, allowing Contessa to do an ability that will permanent fear you, causing a wipe. However, if you do defeat Mal'Ganis before this ability, she will no longer do any abilities at all. Mechanics wise, not much to know. There's a ground effect that will put you to sleep, so dodge it. The adds you can ignore. Once Mal'Ganis dies, and you have beaten the 2-minute timer, you need to DPS Contessa as soon as possible, as there's a debuff that constantly stacks up on you and becomes unhealable if you take too long. Again, at 610 item level, you should be doing more than enough DPS to kill him fast and get her down before the debuff overwhelms you. This isn't too hard if you do it in this way. The next encounter is Rygelon. I am rating this encounter expert. The only reason is because you need some insane burst DPS to avoid the one-shot orb mechanic. This fight is tough. You have a really short amount of time to defeat him. The main reason is the orb mechanic that will instant kill you if you get 7 stacks. When the fight begins, burst damage on him as much as you can until you see the collapsing Quasar. Try to AoE these down and not waste any major abilities on them, as they are very low HP, but you do need to kill them. This is easier said than done. If you kill too many too fast, they won't be up when you need to use them, as they only stay on the ground for 12 seconds. However, if they touch Rygelon, they won't drop at all. The idea here is to delay killing them as long as you can, while not letting them hit Rygelon. When you step onto one, you go into a dark horizon, where you can't be targeted by the orbs he summons. The idea here is to stay in this dark horizon phase until the boss dies. If you come out for too long, you will get 7 stacks and you will wipe. You will only get 2 collapsing Quasar sequences before the boss does his massive bang. By this point, if the boss is not dead, you are going to wipe no matter what. As you can see here, I managed to keep the dark horizon on me and staggered the orbs just enough to kill him, but it was extremely tight. He died right as I was about to get that 7th stack. Obviously this will become easier and easier when you get higher item level. If you have enough burst and can manage the Quasar fields while staying in the dark horizon as long as possible, you should be okay defeating this boss. But it's by no means easy, and you should expect to wipe a few times until you get it right. The final encounter is the Jailer. I am rating this encounter expert. You need to be smart with your damage buff, and there's a period where you have to burst a chunk of his HP to skip an instant wipe mechanic. This fight mechanically is very easy, but there is some RNG to if he decides to skip phase 2 or not, which if he doesn't skip in time, you will get a rune that causes an instant wipe. When you pull the Jailer, you want to go over to the Azerite pools on the ground. These stack up to 6 times and give you a nice damage buff that increases your damage by 42% at 6 stacks, and it lasts for 30 seconds. You need to work on your timing with this, because once Jailer goes to 60% HP, you can no longer receive this buff. Move out of his domination grip and keep collecting pulls. He will then root you to the ground and do a tank combo. You should easily survive it. Move to the next Azerite pull and be ready for the first rune bomb. Drop the bomb in one of the holes when it's about to explode. Be careful with your positioning here, as you can easily blow yourself up into a new hole and die. When he does Relentless Domination, line of sight it using the pillar, or you get mind controlled. Get him as close to 60% and try to refresh your Azerite damage buff so you can maximize the use out of it. Once he hits 60%, he does another domination cast, but with multiple pillars. Line of sight this, and then precast any class buffing abilities that you need to burst. You need to burst him from 60% to sub 30% before he does the next phase ability. If you see him turn to the World Soul and cast a rune on you, you have wiped. This rune will charm you and can only be removed if you take around 800,000 damage. He will then force you to walk to the cliff and jump off. If you keep getting this, your DPS probably isn't fast enough. However, this is RNG dependent, as here you can see I make it without even using Lust, but there have been attempts where I didn't make it with Lust. If you pass this without the rune, you have won. He will put an Absorb Shield up, which you have to break before the cast ends, or he will heal. He has such little HP at this point, you should probably be able to burst the rest down and ignore the Mythic-only phase mechanics. So to summarize, get 6 stacks of your Azerite buff, push him to 60% HP, and make sure you have as much of the Azerite buff as you can. Blow all CDs, and try to push him as fast as possible to skip phase 2. If you make it, you win. And that's it. Definitely not easy to solo, but it's completely doable at 610 item level and will only get easier as we get more gear from Season 1 and beyond for the War Within. Good luck on your mount. If this video helped you in any way, please consider leaving a like and click on subscribe. It helps with the algorithm and promotes the video to others to see. Thank you so much for your support, and I will see you guys in the next video.